You take the red pill. You take the blue pill. I'm not that sort of fan. I never have been. I've never been the sort of person who just quotes things out of the blue. But it's always been the mystery of the Matrix has always been one of the primary focuses of its fandom, and people rightfully the first film is tight and you know now a wasted scene, very together. And while it's sequels, I don't mean to be harsh or anything, but they are a bit more of a mess. But you know what? I much prefer people who are trying to do something different than folks who are, resting on their loyal laurels. Um, let's see if I don't like having that. Okay, so here's the thing. In the last 27 years, it's been almost 27 years since the Matrix premiered. I was, I think, yeah, that was year after I graduated high school. I've earned the gray. Um, but it's like one of the big and unexpected developments is how the how the character how it's how a series that is so obviously coded as woke. I mean, just look at the cast. What do the cast look like? Well, Tank and Dozer are obviously African American. You know, one of the lead characters, one of the lead heroes, who is always kicking everybody's butt. Trinity, a woman. Uh, Look at who's the leader of the Nebuchadnezzar, a black man. Uh, APOC is, if not, is some sort of you know either Latino or he is you know Polynesian or whatever, but he is definitely not a white person. The one and Keanu, Keanu is a mixed race person um, whose ancestry includes Hawaiian and Asian ancestry, as European. I mean, it's like just look at the cast, and you'll see that the ideas are fairly woke. The character of Switch, the was supposed to actually switch genders between originally between when they were in the Matrix and when they were in the real world, which is which of course was too progressive for the times. But you look at Zion, what Zion looks like, and it's like look at the list of the folks on the soundtrack, including the one who pushes the last part of the last song in the movie. That's Rage Against the Machine, which is about as left wing political band as you can get. The you look at the sequels, and the characters are all multiracial, or the characters are of different races, if not multiracial themselves. Um, in fact, the only characters that are consistently white and male are the agents, who are almost stereotypically so. Yeah, but it's not a film series about vilifying anybody for their race, or it's about it's about mainly opposing it's an anti-authoritarian sort of system, world. It's an anti-authoritarian sort of film. While at the same time, the sequels kind of say, well, at the same time, we need the machines to survive, and which it kind of softens the sort of hardline anti-machine part of the last one. But I think it's important to keep in mind, as you look at the Matrix, that it is most definitely a left wing production, a left wing script. I mean, the monologues that Agent Smith gives as he's trying to break Morpheus. Oh my God! In the theaters, it was when I watched that, it was like, holy crap! They're making that character code as not just racist, but the kind of foul racist, the kind of person who is just like who makes you feel dirty when you listen to their rhetoric. And it's the greatest irony that the people who talk the most like Agent Smith, the people who want a society built much like a screw your personal identity sort of society, are the ones who have embraced the red pill, because they have forgotten everything else about what the red pill is supposed to represent. Even just in the first film, they have forgotten everything that every part of the truth that was meant to be revealed, and instead have just taken on the mechanic of the point of rhetoric, the mechanic of it, that of the red pill revealing truth. So they've turned it into basically just a way of justifying a conspiracy theory. justifying a false reality, lying to people, and marketing that as truth telling, as truth indoctrination. And being indoctrinated becomes a virtue. Believing a line of thinking, an ideology, becomes a virtue, becomes being aware, being out of the matrix. And the irony of that position, the irony of that sort of corruption of the original Matrix message is one of the most appalling abuses of popular culture messaging I've ever seen. And the ironic result is that a lot of people end up blue pilled as a result of it. They end up in a state where they are completely divorced from reality. They have been surrounded by a false reality built on false facts, built on pseudoscience, built on manipulation, sociopathic manipulation that just serves a political machine. And yet they think they're the ones who are truly awake, truly aware. But of course, how else would you do it? This is the irony, is that inadvertently, the Wachowskis created, it's any tool that can be used to inspire a rebellion against authority, against tyranny, against whatever, can also be co opted and repurposed to serve authority, to serve tyranny. Basically, they have to get people in a kind of cognitive trap, a kind of situation where they, a kind of situation where they're simply unable to find a route out through the facts to find the truth, or unwilling. I mean, what is the red pill, blue pill choice? You know, the the red pill is, the blue pill is, you go back to your comforting reality. You go back to your, you go back to your comforting dream. You go back, you wake up and nothing is nothing seems odd anymore. You're just living a quote unquote normal life, even though in reality you are a slave, you are a battery, you are a part of the, you know, you are a part of this, you are embedded in the system. And on the other hand, you have, you are brought to face a difficult truth. You are, you see how far the rabbit hole goes. In fact, the rabbit hole has become, you know, code language for, doing a deep dive of research on things. And I 100% believe that the Wachowskis never intended for this to become the way their, the to become the way that their um, ideas would be used. But anytime you kind of anytime something shines out so bright, anytime you have some sort of, you know, anytime you have a an idea so compelling. I mean, it happened before. It is the height of irony that it is the height of irony that Star Wars, which is about a rebellion against imperialism, gets hijacked by the Reagan administration to be used as the nickname for their strategic defense, their nuclear weapons shield. I that the language of, of opposing the evil empire gets co-opted by folks that were somewhat the model for that evil empire. If you go back to the material, George Lucas basically says that they were patterning the rebels after the Viet Cong. They were patterning the empire not just on the Nazis or other obvious sort of fascists, but also in part on the sort of more militaristic, more imperialist parts of American policy. Quite leftist, if you take them at their word. And that's to say nothing about how the almost prescient way in which the prequel trilogy anticipates the kind of fascist takeover we're in the middle of. But let's go back to the Matrix. When I was younger, I was quite shocked to find out that the one of the Wachowskis was transitioning. And I thought maybe they'd kind of fallen down a rabbit hole themselves. That was honestly my sort of um, rather not woke thought. But over time, I've come to realize that this was always in the background. I mean, that hero moment in the subway at the end of the subway fight, where you know where Agent Smith is basically going, it's inevitable, you know, Mr. Anderson, and he goes, "My name is Neo," and then ceiling bashes him, um, so that he can flip out of the way of the train as it runs over Agent Smith. But that's him there. The context, the underlying subtext is that Agent Smith keeps on dead naming Neo, keeps on using the name that he had when he was in the Matrix. And this is Neo basically saying, I am not that person. I am Neo. This is my identity. And he takes it back. There is an anecdote that one of the Wachowskis shared about how they were, at a certain point in such despair over their own uh, gender dysphoria that they were considering leaping in front of a train. The subtext is actually quite the subtext is actually quite bracing there. That this is a rejection of that. That this is a choice towards life. Life with your true identity, life as your true self, as opposed to life under an imposed, required identity placed upon you by authority. And yet, of course, you look at, you know, you look at Elon Musk and all those other people going on about how they're red pilled. And guess what they're saying? They're saying that people like that are crazy, that people like that are groomers, that people like that are a threat to whoever, if they go to a restroom, they're a threat to the young girls and women in there. Hardly, hardly what the originators of your ideas would characterize as the message they wanted to be sent out by the red pill, blue pill sort of thing. Red pill, blue pill was never just about. I mean, guess ultimately they demonstrate in the subsequent movies. Spoiler for 24-year-old films that even the red pill itself is a kind of lie. It turns out that the Matrix itself, that Zion is part of the Matrix system. That basically, in order to preserve in order for people to accept the programming, they had to have a choice to get out of that programming, even on a subconscious or unconscious level. That they would accept the programming, sort of as a choice. If they were given a choice, they'd be willing to they'd be able most of them would be able to accept it, and those that couldn't, they would be shunted over to Zion, where they would be periodically cold, you know, s- which is horrible, of course. But even so, even so, it's a commentary saying that the stability of the system was in part maintained by allowing people to have a choice, by allowing people to be their true selves, not just their matrix imposed selves. And it sort of gives a new sort of dimension to it also allows us to look at the way identity has been subsequently exploited as a means of manipulation. It ironically fits the way in which these people, they're trying to get out of the system, they're trying to overthrow the establishment, and the establishment keeps on filtering us through, throwing us through, moving us through. um it keeps on pushing us through these processes designed to keep us locked into their system. I mean, if you look at the Tea Party, if you look at the MAGA movement, both 1.0 and 2.0, if you look at what people like Elon Musk have created in terms of the dark enlightenment, it's like they're using the language of freedom to get people to accept authoritarian rule. They're using the language of identity in order to get people to force an identity on the nation, to force the dominance of a certain group, white males, back onto those who had struggled free in the last few decades. They're using the tools that people have used to struggle against, the tyranny, struggle against illusion and manipulation and other things, as tools for manipulation, as tools for domination. And how can this happen? How can good tools, tools that allow people to do good for themselves, be so manipulated? And the simple answer is that, you can use a lug wrench to, you know, change a tire, to get your sainted mother to a hospital. You could also use that lug wrench to brain your mother, to murder her. You can use a gun to defend your family. You can use a gun to accidentally shoot or, intentionally murder your family. You can use a computer to find and help victims of human trafficking. You can use your computer to download CP, to try and chat up an underage person in order to manipulate them into abuse. You can use tools of whatever kind and of whatever way, and tools that deal in ideas, tools that deal in our moral choices, they can always be corrupted. And that's a sad fact of it. You can always convince somebody to give up their freedoms, and the best way, in fact, is to not make it feel to them until it's too late that they are giving up their freedom. You can get them to, you can use the language. I mean, what does it say that people are saying, oh, we should do away with stories or plaques or displays or exhibits that, highlight the achievement of women, of minorities, of Jews, of Muslims. We can, we will take those down, put those away. And why will we do that? Because supposedly it's racist and bigoted to highlight those things for them rather than just only have white people, white men sort of celebrating things. You know, they'll talk about how, oh, you shouldn't hide history by taking down these statues glorifying these Confederate generals, even if it's in the middle of inner cities where the people who constitute the majority of the population are the kind of people that those generals would have wanted to keep enslaved. cities that once were majority white and majority racist white, to be blunt and politically incorrect about it, now are majority black, and the people who look at glorifying these statues glorifying the Confederacy and these slave owners and these people who betrayed their nation in order to preserve slavery. Do we want to glorify them anymore? Maybe we don't. Maybe they've had their time to be glorified. But you know what? What those same people who are, you know, oh, you're doing away with history. But when that same history, when the true history of what went on in the Civil War, of what the motivations for the South and the Civil War, you know, these weren't simply theme park racists here. They weren't simply otherwise unbigoted people playing the part of folks who believed that it was right to keep other people enslaved, particularly people of a certain race. It it wasn't it what these people were genuinely racist. And yes, many of our ancestors were genuinely racist. Many of our ancestors came from places that were, to be quite blunt, very white. If we're talking people like me, and you know, yes, slavery existed elsewhere. Even today, it still does. Does that excuse the plantation slavery system? Does that make it any less evil? Any less of a stain on our past? And the answer is no. The answer, it's a difficult thing to learn. I would not be shocked, though I would certainly not be pleased, to find out that my ancestors owned slaves. And I'm sure that in their day, in their time, they had justifications for it. Just like the, I'm certain that if my essays get dug up by folks decades in the future, that they may not like what I had to say. They might be confounded that, oh, he's so much of a hawk there. He's so much of, he's so militaristic. You know, he's, he talks about law and order, just like a lot of those other people who, did this or that. You know, we're not angels here. We're human beings. But it to me, a lot of this is about how do you choose to be, and how are you allowed? I mean, a lot of the way that the right wing is handling books, history, and all these other things is they're trying to deprive kids, deprive children of the knowledge that would enable them to be able to choose between what they want to indoctrinate, what the adults want to indoctrinate the children with, and what the and what actually occurred, what other people say. So you sort of get this. They want to kind of stagnate the child's knowledge, stagnate the child's understanding, make sure they're not learning about these other things because they're viewing everything through this ideological lens. They're viewing everything through this lens of political identity, through this lens of cultural and social and cultural identity. In terms of being part of movements that are opposed to this, opposed to that. This is part of what we end up dealing with a lot of times when it comes to the language that, say, flat earthers or anti-vaxxers use. It's a lot of the language is this sort of social engineering BS that kind of goes, if you don't believe this, then you're supporting these other evil people over here. If you don't believe that vaccines are poison, you support big pharma and you ignore their lies. Yeah, more than anybody else, because I keep my ear to the ground on scientific issues. I know that the pharmaceutical companies have told a lot of lies, have marketed a lot of unsafe products. You know, I know this very well. I also know that they market a lot of products that do objective good for people. And how is this? Well, we have regulators that basically demand that if you're going to market a product, it's going to have certain safety. It's going to have to be safe to administer, at least, you know, more harm than good, or more good than harm. Sorry. It's going to have to actually do something and not just simply be no better than a placebo. And it's got, it has to do what what's on the label. It's got to be an improvement on doing nothing. And those are laws that we put on people after years of them trying to market things the way a lot of modern wellness products are marketed. Uh, we've created a sort of uh, a side system on top of what we already got, that where they don't have to prove that it actually does anything good, makes any difference to people. They don't have to prove that it actually works as real medicine. That there is a difference that occurs between if you know take it or do not take it, between taking it and taking a placebo. I mean, there's so many things in the wellness industry that don't have to prove that they can do what they say they do. And you get people who are singing, even with prescription drugs like ivermectin and HCQ, you have people who are skipping way ahead of the randomized controlled trials and saying, "Oh, it must be a wonder drug. It must be the best possible drug for COVID-19. In fact, better than taking the vaccine, better than taking the Paxlovid or anything like that." And it's sort of like they're not concerned about scientific method per se. They're not concerned about whether or not um, it's been tested against the placebo. They'll say, "Oh, they didn't do actual testing on the COVID vaccine. That was just experimental." And meanwhile, they'll take two drugs that never passed a randomized control trial for for the application. That's how you have to do it. You don't, in order to do on label use, you have to show scientifically that the drug is safe and effective at the dose and the preparation necessary in order to deal with the given condition. You have to scientifically prove that before you can say, like this can be used for that. Like you've got, a lot of these GLP-1 and agonists, like like um, like Zepbound slash Mounjaro, like Ozempic and its other use. I mean, that Mounjaro versus Zepbound thing. That's basically two different names for the same compound. Only one side of that compound, one use of that compound is as a as is that as a therapeutic against diabetes, and the other is as a weight loss drug. But it had to scientifically prove that it could do that and that in order to be marketed for that and that. That is the law in the United States. As far as prescription drugs go, you are only allowed to claim such uses if you scientifically prove them. And yet, these people, there has not been a successful um, randomized controlled trial for either ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine as far as um, there hasn't been a successful trial for COVID-19 as an antiviral drug. What they did this off of is there were some petri dish tests, basically in vitro, where they sprayed a lot of the chemical on the virus containing cells, and it seemed to suppress the virus. But that result is light years from being able to say that you could put that into a human being, a living human being with a liver, with kidneys, with blood, and everything else, and immune cells, that you could put that into there and have it do what it's claimed to do. Instead, people say, well, I got good results off of this. You can get a good result off of a placebo. Did you know that? That's in fact, the whole point of a placebo. It's the yay medicine effect. It's the, hey, I've got a pill. Hey, I've got an injection. And that effect is real. You do get a little bit better when you get what you think is medicine into your body. But you got to prove that there's more to it than that. And that's why you have that control arm with not just with nothing, doing nothing, but with a placebo that basically demonstrates that once we get past the yay medicine effect, you know, that there's something else going on, and that something else is good. That you're not seeing excessive sort of risks of organ damage or immune response, or inappropriate immune response or whatever. But I mean, and it's ironic that if you look at it, ivermectin, it's not just for deworming folks. You can also use it to deal with lice, and other you know vermin, because it's basically a paralytic for agent for worms and bugs who have their, particular kinds of neurons outside of the protection of a blood brain barrier, a blood spinal cord barrier, like we have. In fact, there are some people who can't take ivermectin because they've got a mutation that lets the ivermectin through into the central nervous system, which is a bad thing because it interferes with an important kind of neural response that you've got. So people can end up, having affected status and being woozy and everything. Um, but going on, you have this group of people who have taken on these drugs and taken on the belief that these drugs work for the particular application. And rather than wait for that particular application to be scientifically tested, they instead just believe it as a group and believe that any opposition to saying that it works is other people identifying as part of another group. So it's ironically that they're kind of blue pilling themselves into believing that something is true that cannot actually be proven true according to the facts that are out there. They are miring themselves in illusion, miring themselves in a belief system that is not, you know, worked out by reason, by proper reason, even as they claim that they are the enlightened ones. Knowledge as a social sort of system that you have certain people who have authority, certain people who can tell you what is right, certain people who can tell you what is good, and that it's not simply that these people have done, have gone through this, this, and this in order to come to this conclusion, and that if you are willing to undergo the training, you can learn all the different facts, all the different techniques that allow you to ultimately be able to say, figure out for yourself, test for yourself these conclusions and see if they're actually true. So rather than have something where you, it's a matter of, who do you trust? What do you trust? As opposed to how do you determine what to trust and what not to trust? What process, what cognitive process can you undergo in order to figure out the steps to figuring out the truth for yourself? Like, with geometry, you know, how can I figure out using trigonometry, for example, how to survey an area, how to establish what the different elevations are, what the different positions are, what the actual objective position of something is, you know how to account for the curvature of the earth, even rather than go through all that trouble, which is work. People all too often just fall into camps, become part of a sort of a social sort of um, network, and this becomes part of the problem that you're locked into believing a certain set of things, and if you don't continue to believe those things, you get expelled. If you don't continue to believe that all trans people are just crazy, you get expelled. If you don't continue to believe that white is right and white people are the that minorities need to just shut up and then sit down and whatever. If you don't continue to believe that, you're out. You're outcast. The sort of you buy in or get out. Buy in or get out. You know, be the, be part of the group, part of the system that we're constructing here, or be an outcast, deprived of the support, maybe even hunted, maybe even destroyed. You see how this is working? You see how this red pilling is actually getting you into a situation where your associations of other people become where you're kind of forced to be a conformist to a system, forced to be a conformist, to an identity uh, other than your own, forced to be something else than yourself in order to exist, in order to live a comfortable life with the support of society. This is what the so called red pills these days all too often want you to do. And as such, well, you can say that these red pills are actually the worst blue pills possible. They've taken the blue pill and they've gone to sleep. They've decided they don't want to be woke. They want to go back to sleep. They want to just look at everything as if it's all about just being a nice, quiet acceptor of normalcy, of the tyranny of the averages. So, what will I tell you? I will tell you that there is no secret, which is not to say that secrets don't exist, which is not to say that there are not things you can, you know, learn to broaden your horizons, that there aren't conspiracies, that there aren't hidden agendas. There are plenty of those. But what I'm going to tell you is that there is no easy way to stay right, to stay in the right. That there is always effort, that there is always thought required, that there is always that you have to be awake in the world, enlightened in the world. I would tell you, this is a struggle and it's not one I always succeed in. But to the extent I have succeeded in my life, I have succeeded by not just questioning somebody else's reality, but questioning my own perspective on reality, by checking, fact checking the things that I want to believe, seeing whether the things that other people are saying who are opposed to me, seeing whether those things are actually correct. And if so, to what extent? What's the catch? What's, what might be in the way? we have these brains for a reason. We have these brains for a reason, and that reason is that the world is not always obvious. There are secrets to what is true, but there is no one master secret that you can learn or become an acolyte of that will yield you absolute knowledge, that will yield you the ability to know right from wrong without any fallibility on your part. You are fallible. That's something I had to learn the hard way, and that I hurt other people in the course of learning. You have to you have to be willing to accept that you might not be the one. You might not be the hero of the story. That you might not be the one who needs to win at any given point in time. Although it's not wrong to do your best to try and succeed, but the point is not, simply to be always the one on top. Sometimes the more enlightened, the better, the more moral position to take is the one where you yield in favor of somebody else. It's not, you know, it's hard to be a thinking, conscientious, good person. It's not simply about following rules, it's about understanding the rules. It's not simply about following law, it's about understanding the law, thinking about the law, thinking about the rules, thinking about how we assemble all these things together, considering that we may not know everything. We talk about, for example, gender identity. We talk about transgender people, as if it's just basically pathological. And some people get the notion that they must be insane. They believe that they're a woman. I mean, it's obvious they're a man. But something, perhaps things don't develop. Perhaps there's a part of development that went differently for this person, and that there's objectively something going on up there, neurologically speaking, that that you can't just simply tell the person, well, ignore that, because it's a part of their everyday existence. I know what it is to be somebody who has an everyday existence that is fundamentally different in some way to what to how other people experience things. As a person on the autism spectrum, you you see things people don't see, real things. You get confused by things that other people aren't confused by. You don't perceive the moods and the intents of other people quite as well as other people do. And it's not simply that you're somehow stupid or inherently foolish. You know, I'm far from that according to any test you can throw my way. I'm the person who aced tests without studying, and I say that basically as a fact rather than as a boast. But even so, I'm a I'm quite a foolish person from the perspective of other people when it comes to social things. Quite naive. But, it's like it's the way I exist. It's not me trying to be something or trying not to be something. It's not me lying to people. It is the truth of my existence, and understanding that the truth of somebody's existence can be in the wiring of their brain. Then I can understand that maybe somebody has a brain that developed female despite the rest of the body developing male, or vice versa, or a mix of the two. And that this to tell them that you have to live you as if your brain isn't that way, it's impossible. I know that my brain, it's not going to, no matter what I do, I'm going to viscerally exist as an autistic person does, because it's determined by the neurology. I can learn to adjust, I can learn to figure out things, I can learn to kind of, but I have to learn things in addition to that in order to get past that, in order to get past those disabling aspects of my condition. And so I've learned that understanding the truth, that what seems to me to be the truth can actually be unreliable. I've also learned that I am what I am. There's so many aspects about, who I was growing up. The way I was unable to run very much. I thought I was just being a wimp. I thought I was just not tough enough, that I couldn't handle, you know, I couldn't plug through it and just, and it turns out I actually had something different about my heart, about the way it operated, about the way it was structured, that made that happen. That made it to where I couldn't, that to where it was legitimately difficult for me to do those things. It wasn't simply that I was, you know, that I wasn't getting proper exercise or whatever. It's that I legitimately had a condition that made that the case. And as a lot of things, turns out that I couldn't help those things. But still, I'm responsible for my own behavior. I'm responsible for my choices. I should try to make good choices with the ability to choose that I have. But if somebody is got something that they can't choose, which is being a certain way, like being trans, it's understanding yourself is very important. The more I've understood myself, the better I've understood how to deal with that, how to deal with my life. And that's the thing. That's what the freedom that we're supposed to have. That's what it's given to us for. That was the philosophical point of what the framers put into motion, of what the real federalists The folks who structured the Constitution the way they did, what they wanted to do. They didn't want a weak government. They wanted one that was strong enough to govern, but also bound by the will of the people. They wanted something that worked, that was practical. But ultimately, I think they wanted people to be able to improve themselves, optimize themselves, be the best person, not just simply settle for being a peasant, a subject underneath somebody else, but to give every person the ability to rise to, you know, to become the best of their, best possible person, and not be simply hemmed in by other people having shuffled them into a class, by other people having tyrannically imposed rule on them, tyrannically imposed a religious set of beliefs on them, tyrannically imposed, you know, these different expectations. And it's ironic that people have taken these freeing thoughts, these transcendental beliefs, and have used them, abused them in order to try and stuff people back into the old and defective ideologies of the past. Monarchy and or aristocracy, those are things that failed, and failed more and more as humanity learned more and more, as people learned more and more about themselves, as we grew out of the dark ages of the past. Finding your true self, you cannot find your true self by chasing after somebody else's approval, by buying into somebody else's belief system. To find the truth, you have to see for yourself. To find the truth, you have to look into yourself. I mean, a huge part of the Matrix um, story, is the difference between seeing the path and walking the path. The difference between believing something, I am the one, and actually doing the things, actually choosing to do the things that fully fulfill your identity as a person. And it's just so sad. It's tragic. It's awful. Can I have a quick consult in the living room, people, please? Mm, pardon that. It's just tragic that people have used that all, abused that all in order to be, um, in order to just live as part of a dark system. Well, y'all have a good day.